The Indus Valley civilization, according to the study of the archaeologists and historians, is an amazing civilization. Dates back perhaps 2,500 years BC. There is no doubt that it derived from an ancient religion. That we find that all civilizations must come from spiritual teachings. That's becoming more evident and clear as people give more thought to that concept. That without the understandings of religion, you can't have civilization. We will maybe discuss that in more detail towards the end of the lecture series tomorrow, why that is. This Indus Valley people had sanitation, including sewer systems and manhole covers. The irony is today most places in India do not have sewer systems and manhole covers. But back in the Indus Valley, that's what they had. They were the inventors of baked brick. They also invented sheet metal and rivets and did construction on that basis. They also appear to have small-scale manufacturing using systems approach. Advanced irrigation, which is the foundation for all civilizations, because if everybody could only grow food enough for themselves, you have no crafts, you have no artisans, you have no scholars. In other words, you do not have civilization. They had pictographs, one of the early writing systems. And they had the most marvelous invention of all, which really wouldn't reach fruition until the Islam. They had the decimal system. The decimal system long, long before Roman numerals. Have any of you tried to multiply Roman numerals? Don't waste your time. These people apparently were visited by another people from the north called the Aryans. And they brought a body of teachings called the Vedas. These Vedas have no real date of their origin. They're that ancient. However, they had three basic belief systems. One was that there was a changeless reality beneath this world. Now you got to understand, when they say beneath, they don't mean physically below. But that's all the people could understand, so they would draw pictures of this reality holding up the earth. See, but beneath means what Plato meant by idea, that there's a spiritual reality that manifests itself as a physical reality. See, the Hindus are the first to have this. You will see that all philosophy, all psychology starts with Hinduism. All science starts with Hinduism, in my opinion. It's an extraordinary, extraordinary experience. The reason why we see such advanced thought in the East, while the West was worshiping golden calves, is because these were different people. These were more refined people. However, it is not to say that the West was not significant. It was. because it was the West that would learn how to live in higher and higher social units, that would learn administration, that would learn the practical aspects of civilization to a degree the East could never attain. But the East would reach understandings of individual mystical understandings of salvation, of spirituality that the West would not get. It would not be until you bring these two arms together when the promised one would come that would bring the East and the West together. Excuse me. Now you see why I have that. So it is in this milieu that Krishna comes. We don't know when Krishna was born. It could be as early as 1700 BC, or it could be as late as 1000. Again, with Krishna, we see the same prophecy of a star rising in the heaven, and the soothsayers telling the king that a great one is born who will become greater than you. And again, the king, except a little bit different twist on it, the king knows who the person is and orders the death of not just Krishna, but the entire family. So they escape. And Krishna said when he received his mission, which was through a similar kind of sign as Moses and Christ, that he receives their point where he is to go out and tell the people. He said his mission was to restore the ancient Vedic truths from the corruption of his time. The people, when Krishna came, the Vedic religion had become extremely corrupt. The priest class had become, instead of guiding the people to spiritual truth, were acting in a barbaric fashion. We see this every time a new religion comes, that the clergy become the most corrupt element of society, and they hinder the people from seeing the truth. His teachings are summarized in a book called The Song of God, the Bhagavad Gita. And it consists of a very small book, 700 verses, 18 chapters. Its first definitive form is in 400 AD. It was actually written down in Sanskrit. Prior to that, it was oral tradition. Today, if you go to a Hindu meeting based on the Gita, they will sit and chant verses from the Gita in the form of song. It has only been until recent times that the Word of God was ever said in prose. In fact, it is forbidden in the Quran to read the Quran. It is to be chanted. All the holy verses, the early Christian writings were chanted, not read. So, because most of the people couldn't read anyway, so they would remember it through the song, and the chanting would also raise the heart to be more receptive to the teachings. The first English translation was done by Sir Edwin Arnold in 1879, and it exploded interest in America and Europe. It is when the Gita became visible to the Western eye. The essence of the Gita can be stated in a few words. It is a path to true freedom through renunciation of self. This will become the foundation of all morality. In fact, the highest philosophical statement on morality will be given by a philosopher named Immanuel Kant in what's called the categorical imperative. That categorical imperative, in essence, is stated by Krishna himself, is that true freedom comes through the renunciation of self. You see, my friends, when we say in America we're fighting for freedom, what are we fighting for? Not for the renunciation of self, we're fighting for the glorification of self. Right? In the Gita, it is broken down into two basic parts. The first is the nature of the material world. The Bhagavad Gita is a poem that was later added to a much larger poem called the Mahabharata, which is about 1 million verses, one of the biggest epic poems in literary history. It's a story about two families battling with each other. The Gita is told in the format of this poem about a warrior named Arjuna, a chariot which he rides on, and a chariot driver who is Lord Krishna. And the metaphors of the Gita are this battle between the two families that we later learn represent good and evil. And also what we also learn is that good and evil is within us. So it is the battle of the lower self and the higher self is what the warrior refers to. The true warrior in all of the religious traditions, whether it's American Indian or the Hindu traditions, is based upon that each human being was created to become a true warrior. That all physical warfare is simply symbolic of the internal warfare between one's lower desires and one's higher conscious knowledge. It is the battle of morality. And we are created as warriors equipped with symbolic arrows and spears to fight that battle. Those spears and arrows, those weapons of warfare, are obedience, loving kindness, submission, and selflessness. You see, this is how we fight our spiritual war. Isn't it ironic that that which became the physical representation of the battle is fought with things that are quite opposite often than those weapons that we require for the internal battle? He said, Arjuna, questioning Krishna, Lord Krishna, he says in the Gita, what is the universe made out of? Krishna says, 5 elements. Arjuna says, pray tell, Lord Krishna, what are those 5 elements? He said, sight, hearing, smell, taste, and feel. How can that be? Because Krishna says, your only knowledge of that material world are through the senses. Therefore, that is its existence. This predates the idealists that came out of the Enlightenment of Europe by some 3,000 years at least. You see? And then Krishna says, Arjuna says, but what is your reality? He says, you see a human form. That is my material reality. But I have given thee Maya for your benefit. But your benefit must be superseded to achieve consciousness. In other words, I have given you Maya to get to this point, but now you must go from this point and go back to beyond Maya. Now, what is Maya, he says? Maya is that you see multiplicity when in reality there's only oneness. Maya is what we differentiate our physical world. Those are individual chairs. You are individual people. That is a building. That is a sign. That is Maya. In reality, Krishna said, it's all one thing. But then he said, your job is to transcend the multiplicity. And so then Arjuna says, but who are you then? What is that oneness in you? And so he says, I will release you from Maya for a moment. And he opens up his garment. And Arjuna is sucked in to this reality. And what he sees when the garment is open is a universe. He sees stars being created, stars being destroyed, galaxies, lights, colors, so intense that he finally screams out and says, no more, I cannot withstand it. And so Krishna closes his garment and becomes a man again. What Arjuna experienced for a brief moment was Krishna, creator of the universe. And now he experiences Krishna as a human messenger of God. And Krishna says, thank you. Now this is a very important part of the Gita. Why? Because it explains why messengers come as human beings. Because if they came in their true reality, it would overwhelm us. We would not be able to withstand the intensity of it. We could not relate to it. We would not be able to be moved by the suffering. If it were not human, how could we have the moving of our hearts by their sacrifice and their suffering? You see, very important concept. Their true reality is not of this plane. But they come in the form of a human temple so that for our purpose, for our ability. He then says, regarding the many gods that the people worshipped at the time, he says, I will tolerate these lesser gods. You see, in the West they did not. But in the East, it's a different people. And this is what Krishna says about the lesser gods. Listen carefully. The lesser gods reside within the one God. Those who worship the lesser gods will go to those realms, but my devotees will come to me. Meaning that if you're satisfied with McDonald's hamburger and fries, have fun. But if you want filet mignon and pâté, come to me. You'll get to me regardless of what path you choose, because all paths lead to me. Some people say, well, then it's not important to recognize the messenger. Why not just keep on worshiping what I choose? I'm having fun. But the point is, if you're a sincere seeker of truth, you want to get the closest you can to that truth. Your journey, if you need to get from here to Salem, You can take many routes to Salem. Some people choose to fly to New York City to get to Salem. You'll eventually get to Salem. But for many of us, we want to go directly to Salem. So we go by spiritual path, highway number 5. He said about the meditation state. Now we're talking about the spiritual world now. See, we were talking about the material world. He said that when you are asleep, you don't know you're asleep until you wake. Which means, therefore, that the waking state is a higher consciousness than the sleep state. This is Krishna. Similarly, now listen carefully, when you meditate, you are aware of the times you haven't meditated. Because when you're not meditating, you don't think about meditation. As soon as you think about meditation, you're meditating, my friends, okay? He said, therefore, the meditation is to the normal waking state as the normal waking state is to the sleep state. That's why you meditate. Then he says something at the end of this logic. You know, the logic, philosophical logic, wasn't invented by the Greeks. This is in the Gita, you know. He then says that when you die and go to the next realm, that realm is to this realm as the waking state is to the sleep state. He says, you don't really know how much of a sleep state this life is until you go to the next world. He said, beware that you do not spend your time here without meditation, because meditation allows you to prepare yourself for that next world. Because when you meditate, you develop the consciousness, that the tools that you will need in that next world. It is very profound. We will talk more about that when we get to the Greeks. He said Dharma. Dharma is not just a TV program, but is meant the law. But in Hinduism, physical law and spiritual law are one law. Dharma means, in the physical world, gravity. Gravity is a property of two bodies attracting one another by their nature. In the spiritual phenomenon, gravity is no different than love. When you put a circle around both the material and the spiritual, you have Dharma. Okay. Now we come to a concept. He says, the samsara cycle. He was asked by Arjuna, am I reborn? He says, yes, you are reborn. But not the rebirth that so many people claim today of coming back after you died to this plane called reincarnation. No, my friends, this is not what Krishna talked about. He said, I have given thee the samsara cycle, the cycle of rebirth. He said that all people have shraddha. And Arjuna says, what is shraddha? He said, it's your viewpoint. It's the way you look at the world. He says, well, how do I know what a person's shraddha is? He said, by what they do. See, there are people who say, well, I believe in this and I believe in that, but what do people really believe in? It's what they do. I believe this is really important, the most important thing in my life, after I go to the mall, and after I do this, and after I do that, then that's the most important thing in my life. Krishna says, shraddha is what you truly believe in. It's how you see yourself in the world, and therefore it's what creates your desires, and it's what you do. Okay, now listen carefully. So out of shraddha comes your desires, your ambitions, your hopes. Because it's how you see yourself in the world. Right? That leads to actions. Now, the Zoroaster will say actions are actually three things. Begin with thoughts, they go to words, and then to deeds. And from actions, there is a cause and effect relationship. In other words, you do something, there's a result. That's called karma. Karma, again, part of Hindu science is not just physical, it's also spiritual. There's karma in the physical world. That's an example of karma, and there's karma in the spiritual. Same thing. You do something, causes something. If the shraddha is aligned to truth, reality, it will lead to actions and karma that will give positive results. But if their shraddha is not aligned to the truth, then it will lead to karma that will cause suffering. The purpose of suffering is to change your shraddha. This is not rocket science, my friends. This actually is the basis for Freud's psychotherapy. You have the, let me see, the id, the superego, which is your worldview. You have the id, which is the desires that come from your heart. And you have the ego, which is what you do. See? If they're not all aligned, if your worldview, what you do and what you desire aren't all aligned, then you go see a therapist. Same business, my friends. But about 3,000 years difference in time, 4,000. The difference between, the problem with material psychology is you could apply it to animals. This applies to humans. This is conscious knowledge. This is different. This is when man must choose beyond his nature. Because when shraddha is simply confined to your nature, which is what animals do, then in animals' case, it does not produce suffering. But in humans, it does. Because humans have nobility that go beyond their nature. Therefore, their shraddha has to be beyond their nature. So suffering in Hinduism is good because it leads to change, which leads to salvation. Suffering, you pray for suffering. This is very anti-American. You do not escape it. Because suffering, if you yearn to suffer so you can learn and change. See how this works? This is wonderful. See, we put the shrinks out of business overnight if we learn this one principle. Right? Don't tell a shrink that. I have enough problems. All right. The path to enlightenment, he said, was to love me. Krishna talking to Arjuna. Love me, serve me, worship me always. Seeking me in your heart, you will at last be united with me. He even gives instructions that when you are dying, that you bring your thoughts to the inner eye, which is at the center of your forehead. And he said to focus all of one's energy on the love of Krishna. And if you do that, then that will determine the course in the next world. So the death process is extremely important in Hinduism. And we'll find it's also in Buddhism and Zoroastrian. In fact, it's my opinion that in most of the ancient traditions, it was one of the most important things you do. In fact, your whole religious life was for the purpose of preparing your death. And death was looked forward to. People looked forward to their death. They didn't run off to a hospital. In the United States, in 1996, I believe over 85% of the entire medical costs were spent in the last 6 months of life. 85%, some $1.5 trillion were spent because people were afraid to die. Okay? And in these ancient traditions, they look forward to it because it is the birth into the next reality. And their whole life was to prepare them for death, not to escape it. He said, one of his most important teachings that Buddha would also say, to renounce the fruits of your action is the highest morality. What does that mean? Can you imagine going to a Microsoft board meeting and saying, let's do this not because of the results it will bring, but because it's the right thing to do? See how much of our society is based on the fruits of action. We even have people running around saying, let's make this happen, let's make that happen. See, in ancient traditions, that would be considered heresy if a person claimed to make anything happen. And in fact, Krishna says you don't make anything happen. The only thing you make happen is to choose. And then it's in God's hands what happens. The only freedom you have, my friends, according to religion, is to choose your higher nature over your lower nature and be willing to act on it. And then you leave it in God's hands. Hey, very anti-American. But you see, we're learning. I teach another lecture series called Toward World Civilization, which follows this one. And we talk about the current problems and the attitudes we have, and where did they come from, And how do we go beyond where we are now? And where are we going from a Baha'i perspective? The fascinating way of thinking, not so much we're going to come up with answers, but what are the tools we can use to even think about the problems we have today? To ask the right questions. He said, you act for the rightness of things. You act on principle. You act for the sake of my beauty. Baha'u'llah's words. You denounce the gains you get. Today I'm going to be very spiritual, and as a result of my high spirituality, my shareholdings in that company are going to go up. See, there's a problem there, my friends. You see, the pure heart is what attracts divine forces to us, according to all these traditions. When we do something for just the beauty of it, when we do things out of the love for what we are doing, not because of what we're going to get, we attract to us those creative divine forces that allow us to love it in the first place. Where do you think the love comes from? When you're an artist or a musician or in your work, when you do the thing for the love of it, it brings a joy to the heart because of the purity of the act. The Bab, in his writings, between 1844 and 1850, he will write that it was because of such an act that God blessed those who recognized him to be able to recognize him. It is for such an act in every age that human beings are able to recognize the truth of a thing. When you want to find truth, no matter what the problem is, you must do it in a spirit of purity. You must want to find the truth because of the benefit that will be derived by the greatest majority of people, not for what you get. This is the problem with modern politics. You see. Now, finally, he gives a prophecy. He says, from the time of the beginning, there have been universal cycles of religion. Religion, he said to Arjuna, is very ancient indeed. In fact, in Hinduism, they have invented the zero, and they went crazy when they invented the zero. They started putting zeros behind numbers so that the age of the earth was like 1 trillion years old, and they had infinite cycles of religion. The latest cycle, he said, of the avatars, which is another word for messengers, began with Adim as the first avatar. And the one before him was Rama, the 7th avatar. He is the 8th avatar. Buddha will be seen as the 9th avatar and relating to the 10th avatar after Buddha. Krishna says, I will come at a later time to correct the misconceptions of what I brought this time, and to unite the diverse spiritual paths. I will be the 10th avatar, the Kalki. I will be the reincarnation of Lord Krishna. I will be the Vishnu Yasha, the glory of God, and will reign for 1,000 years. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break, because we've got to cover Buddha and Zoroaster.